Hello everyone and welcome to the oncoming brainstorm. Today I'm going to be doing a book review of a fantasy sci-fi novel, Magician, written by Raymond Feist. I love this book. I'm a big lover of fantasy and sci-fi. In terms of fantasy, I've read Lord of the Rings, the first two books. I've not read Return of the King yet. I'll get around to it someday. I've read all the Harry Potter books and I've read all of the A Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones books. I loved all of those, really enjoy fantasy, and I got this recommended to me by a friend and bought it for me for Christmas, so I was quite keen to read it and I got through it, all the 841 pages, I got through it pretty quickly. The really unique thing about this book is that it blends fantasy and science fiction really well in a really unique way. That's what makes this book really special in its own way, and for me it kind of sets the standard for modern fantasy and sci-fi. The really great thing about the blend between fantasy and sci-fi is that it's almost seamless, and in this sort of fantasy setting where there's princesses and castles and dragons and elves and dwarves, you know, all the things you have to kind of tick the box to be fantasy. Yeah, you've got princesses in the castles, you've got dragons, you've got dark elves, you've got all these great things that, you know, make a fantasy story. But then you've got characters in this sort of fantasy setting, medieval sort of feel to this world of MIDKEMIA. These characters are saying the words planet and alternate realities and aliens. Really, the book starts off really simple. You know, you don't have to feel bombarded by the fact that it is fantasy and sci-fi. The book starts off in a really small way with this character called Pug, who is our main character of the story. A young, I think about a 15-year-old boy who's just a kitchen staff. He just works in the kitchen of the castle of Cryde, in this really small castle, and it kind of starts off in this sort of coming of age story about this young boy Pug, who has a lot of potential. And right from the start, right from the first chapter, I was on board with this character. I wanted to see him succeed, and he meets this wizard called Kulgan, who is the wizard of Cryde. He sees potential in Pug. He sees that this boy, there's something about him. He's got some sort of magic capabilities, and the story goes on from there. I don't want to spoil too much. I highly recommend reading it. It is so great. If you love fantasy, if you just love good stories, give it a go. Raymond Feist is very good at world building this world of MIDKEMIA, this fantasy sort of medieval world. And the way he expands it is that he doesn't info dump you. He doesn't throw you all the information of, oh look, there is the Grey Towers with the dwarves, and over there is all this stuff with the dark elves. You know, he very cleverly plants the seeds of this world through the eyes of Pug. That's the way he tells the story, through the eyes of this young kitchen boy who learns how to master magic, which is really interesting. I love how he does that. The greatest part for me about this story is that the villains are really interesting. They're very unique for a fantasy story. Often in fantasy stories it can be quite cliche, and this book does follow a few fantasy cliches, but one thing it does break is that the villain isn't the ultimate evil. He isn't the, whoa, I'm going to destroy the world because that's what I am, I'm Mr. Evil. This book does a very good job of sort of curving around the archetype of like Sauron or Voldemort. The villains are very human. You know, you learn about them, you learn a little glimpse of them, the mystery set up with them, and from there they get better and better. They're really well done, and I loved how this book incorporates the villains and adds a very human element to them. And the magic in this isn't overdone either. It's used very sparingly, and when it's done, it's like, whoa, it is amazing. The climax of the book is epic. And it feels very satisfactory. It feels like everything feels natural, like everything's been building up to this. And despite this book being the first in a trilogy, you know, it's part one of the Rift War saga of 3 books, you don't need to read the other 2 books. I've read the second part, and really, while I really enjoyed it, I thought Silverthorn is a really great sequel to Magician. It's not necessary. You don't have to read it unless you're really invested in the story. You do not have to read Silverthorn, which means you don't feel bombarded by the fact that this is a big book and there's 3 in the series. You can just read this and enjoy it. It ends very self-contained. Any criticisms of the book, I would say certain chapters towards the end did drag a little bit and got a bit, I guess it does follow a few cliches, the fact they have dwarves and elves in this fantasy setting, and Raymond E. Feist doesn't really do anything particularly new with the dwarves or elves, but then again, it feels different enough to like differentiate from Lord of the Rings and other fantasy novels. So for me, I don't really have that many criticisms. I guess some of the characters are a little bland, but then again, a lot of them are very humorous. They feel very human. So yeah, they're not the most memorable or amazing characters, but they do the job and you care about them, which for me is enough. They don't need to be the most memorable characters ever. And the character of Pug is really relatable, and I really enjoyed him being sort of the audience avatar, the audience surrogate. So overall, I would give Magician a 9 out of 10. I thought it was a really, really awesome book, and it's one of my favourite books ever. I'd love to read it again when I'm older, come back to it, revisit this book. So if you love fantasy, give it a go. If you guys have read Magician, let me know what you guys think of it. Did you really enjoy it? Were you not too fussed about it? Let me know. And if you're a fan of Raymond E. Feist and the Rift Wars saga, please recommend me some other books in the sort of world of Raymond E. Feist, because he's got a crap load of books out there. He's got so many different trilogies. You know, there's the Empire trilogy, the Serpent War trilogy, the Chaos War trilogy, and they're all within the same universe, which is amazing. So I would love to read more. Recommend me some to, you know, after I finish this trilogy. If you guys want to see a review of Silverthorn, let me know. Thank you guys for watching, take care, and goodbye.